Life is hectic, demanding, and doesn't stop. When honest with ourselves, we must confess we often don't know what the hell we're doing. The Larkcast is an ongoing conversation about the inclusive and mischievous nature of God's presence through the lens of all the things that make up this phenomenon we refer to as life. Astonishing grace and refreshing honesty collide right here for your weekly encouragement. And here we go. Welcome to the Larkcast. This is Russ, your host today. And with me on the Larkcast is Mr. Jameson. How you doing, man?
I'm doing okay. One day at a time, here we are. I'm glad to be here, that's for sure. It's been way too long.
Way too long. People have been asking, where's Jameson? Where's Jameson? I'm like, well, Jameson is being a lark. He's passing on good news. He's hanging out with people. He's loving on neighbors, and he's working hard at a couple of new ventures to pay the bills, man.
Heck yeah.
So, dude, thank you for taking the time out of the crazy schedule to join us in this journey through the book of James. Somebody asked me yesterday, why would we pick this book? And I said, man, we got a chance to unpack the parables on the podcast. If you're new to this, feel free to back up to the beginning and check those out. But we went through these stories about what God is actually like versus what we were told. We found that the parables are stories about what this God's like. They're not principles for building or bringing the kingdom, as many of us have been told. And then we got a chance to go through the book of John and take a look at what love is in the person and work of Jesus. And we said, you know what? It seems one of the things that's always thrown at us in the name of grace is all the whatabouts in the name of faith that ironically undoes grace. So we took a hard look at the book of Galatians, went through that. Again, feel free to check that out if you're new. It's where Paul, right? He just comes and just deals with the legalism that robs us of life. And I feel like James is kind of the opposite of that. It's a book that's often thrown at us in the name of getting it together instead of seeing it for what it is. This is a short book that at first glance can seem to contradict all that Jesus has said and done, but it doesn't. In fact, James would be somebody who I feel like is new to the faith. He's Jesus's half brother, but doesn't seem to come to faith until the end. And so he's a guy who's really been working through all the legalism, right? All the religion, all the ethics that we need to perform and perfect in the name of faith. And I think what he's dealing with is he's tackling the lawlessness, right? Like the things opposite of legalism, lawlessness that can rob you of the joy that's found in who Jesus is. So if you're looking at this book as like, man, this book's going to help me really like nail down the Christian life and get it together. It's not. It's actually doesn't have anything to do with the gospel at all if you read it. but what it does do is it helps us see what can happen when we forget the good news and we step into a lawless life. And so I feel like there's a lot of practical implications in this book when it's taken in the context that it's written, allowing it to say what it's saying. And today we're going to be tackling a verse that is a real humdinger. Like this is one of those passages in James that leads to the just no other way to say it than like kind of like the oh shit moments, right? Have I done enough? Am I going to be counted? And I think what we're going to find here as we dive into this is it's saying anything but that. Would you agree?
I would. And back to that initial question of why would you do this book? It's Lark. I mean, we're going to get into all the trouble every time. We're going to go to the places that are confusing or hard, especially we're going to go to the places that are used against the freedom found in Jesus. And
Yeah.
James, like you said, Russ, is definitely one of those books that gets thrown down like a trump card. And I I kind of understand where that comes from, but the deeper in I get into scripture and into a life of trying to let Jesus be who he said he is, I'm like, why would you do that? That's not what it's for.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind, I'd like to take a couple minutes. And there's some really interesting background on James that helps us put it in the right spot. And I'm sure you guys hit some of it, but man,
It-
there's a couple things here that really change what you're looking at when you look at
yeah.
James. Can we hit those quick?
Yeah, man, we need to because one, we have people who are new that are checking this out all the time, but then two, um, dude, even if we hit it, man, it's such a needed reminder because we are humans and
Hmm.
humans are frail by nature and we forget, man. We forget.
Yep.
So, yeah, dude, put some things into context for us here.
Well, the first one you already mentioned, and that's that James doesn't seem familiar with the Gospels, with the four Gospels. He
Mm-mm.
There's no direct quotations. There's there's no direct lines to show us like, oh yeah, James is working with something that Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John wrote. He's just not. And so that tells you a little bit about the timeline, and it tells you a little bit about who he is, who he's writing to. Um, and the other thing is I think it looks like he's familiar with Paul and Paul's teachings, but again, not Paul's epistles. Okay.
Yeah.
So James, and if you kind of follow timelines and look at the book of Acts and how they all had their conversations and debates and whatnot, you see in the book of Acts that they had a coming back around couple moment a few times, I think. But there was definitely some tension in this book. I am of the opinion that James was written before the epistles. And he also doesn't talk to the Gentiles. He doesn't even address them, which is odd,
Yeah.
uh, given what it's about and what who it is that he says he believes in, being Jesus. And so you kind of have all these things stacking up to show. I think James is writing at the pretty front end, early end of the early church as a pastor of a community of people, or several, maybe. And he's still very, very, very steeped in the Jewish way of faith
Hmm.
while bringing Jesus in to kind of redefine all of it. So that's number one. I think you've got an early letter here, but here's the number two, and this is a big one. This book was not probably written by James, the guy. This book was probably the teachings of James written by somebody way more intelligent, or at least far more capable with the Greek language. So you have somebody who put it together very much in the way and style of wisdom literature. So think the book of Proverbs.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, it makes it really complicated and unnecessary to compare the book of James to the book of Galatians, for example. They're not the same thing. They are not trying to
No.
do the same thing. And one of the things that they're not trying to do the same is how they talk about salvation. Okay. I think that you're also talking about this too, Russ, but James does not appear to be concerned about, I mean, he almost never mentions it, like how you get in. It's
No.
an assumption that you're there. You're already there. That's how the book starts and finishes. Whereas Paul spends an awful lot of time redesigning how people understand that that relationship, that transaction. So to say, oh, they totally disagree on faith and works is like, well, yeah, but they're also talking about totally different things when you really think about it. Because Romans 3:28 says, we hold that a person is justified by faith apart from works prescribed by the law. That's Paul, right? And then we say,
Yeah.
yeah, but James says without works, faith is dead. And so we have this like, we imagine them in a theological boxing ring, and it's like, no, no, no. Paul's doing theology. He's doing it
Yeah.
later than James. James is doing moral, uh, the moral outworkings of this life of faith. He's helping you understand how this works and where it goes and what it can do for you in the world around you. He's not saying how you get in or how you get qualified or how you get justified. He's
Right.
It's a totally different conversation. And I know it's more complex than me talking about it for 5 minutes, but I want to encourage people the further into James we get here, especially on this one today with a doozy about testing, like it's okay. Like let it just be another one of the books in the Bible. You can't treat every book like they're the only one in the Bible. We got to read them all. You got to
Yeah.
let them say what they say. And James is unapologetically morally focused, but he's still talking about Jesus as God. So those those are all things that are suspended right in front of us and we got to kind of find our way through them.
Yeah. And I think everything you're saying is extremely needed because, we come at these things and if we're not careful, we can grab on to like one thing in James and before long we're interpreting like the rest of the scripture through it.
Yes.
And it's like, guys, we don't interpret Jesus through James. We interpret James through Jesus.
Yep.
This is crucial. Um, Especially like you brought up. I mean, you're talking one of the first New Testament books written by a guy who was, early grabbing on to the good news of Jesus, who it seems like during the life of Jesus probably didn't believe that his half brother was the Messiah, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
He's coming out of this Jewish background. But I love the fact that you brought up something that's so needed. Um, he begins the letter and ends the letter with the assumption that everyone belongs. And I think it's very easy to forget that. And so when he's writing from that perspective, okay, and then you get to a passage like we're going to get into with testing of the faith and why that matters and all the implications that can come from it. Because if we're not careful, there's a lot of insecurity and anxiety that can come out of that passage. Um, these are the moments where we have to pull back and go, oh, this is one small letter in the New Testament. This is when it was written. This is who it was written by. This is where he was at in the journey when he wrote it. And then look at that through the lens of Jesus. Otherwise, you can wind up pretty quickly with um, the idea of like a bipolar God and a pretty schizophrenic faith.
Yes.
Like
Exactly.
that's just all there is to it.
Well, and if you like think about it, if you go like, and maybe someday we'll do this, Russ, going through the book of Proverbs, right? Like if you're
Yeah,
going through the book of Proverbs and that's the only way you approach your life of faith and the input you get from the scriptures, it's gonna get weird because the things that the book of Proverbs tells you to do,
yeah,
not only are some of them direct contradictory statements to each other within the book of Proverbs, but some of them almost come out as totally absurd. Others, you're just like, I don't even get it.
yeah,
And the point is, you're not going to build your faith out of one book like that. It's one among many. And yes, we have to reinterpret the book of Proverbs through the testimony about Jesus, what he's done,
yeah.
who he is, and most importantly, who he says we are in him.
Right.
That's our filter, that's our lens because those are huge things. Those are of epic proportion. So I'll say it in this way because I think it'll help people remember it. You need to read the book of James not like Philippians, but like Proverbs,
Yeah,
because it's not theology, it's wisdom. So you got to take it with a grain of salt. You got to be careful with it. And keep in mind, in a way, James is trying to tell you to be careful with Paul.
yeah,
So you can feel the
100%.
tension. You can feel the
Yeah,
tension.
yeah. I feel like that's the nugget in all of that. You have to treat it like a book of wisdom, not theology.
Right.
And if you come at it from that angle, right, good things happen. So, without further delay, let me just read a few of these passages we're going to get into.
Mm-hmm.
Sound good?
Sounds
And then
awesome.
feel free to fire away, man. So, verse 12, chapter 1, blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life right out the gate, right? There's that, wait, say that again. He goes on and says this, which God has promised to those who love him. Well, that's another problem because love isn't something that comes from us. And from what we can tell from 1 Corinthians 13, love's not something we're really good at. He says, I am being tempted by God. I'm sorry. Let one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil. He himself tempts no one, but each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Verse 15. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth faith. Do not be deceived, my brothers. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the fathers of light, from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. Of his own will be brought us forth by the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. I'll stop there. So there it is, man. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. What's he saying there, man?
Note that it starts with blessed, right? So here you
Mm-hmm.
have the cue. This is a proverb. This is a wisdom oracle. This is a an ism, right? This is an ancient
Yep.
ism, if you will. So you
Steadfast, happy, satisfied might be one of the best words that you can find for the understanding of the word blessed.
right, which brings in the whole point of wisdom literature. What is wisdom literature? What is it for? The Psalms, the Proverbs, the Book of Job, Song of
Yeah.
Solomon, Sirach, all of those other ones too that didn't quite make the cut. Like they are about you living the good life. They're about, hey, you're a human.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest problem with humans is there's no written manual and you're pretty terrible at being human. You just are,
Yeah.
even though you're a human. So you keep trying to be something other than human. Guys, this is like the underlying current of the whole Bible. Is this, hey, you live in a world where you're a human being, you're a creature, and you are loved by the one that made you. And for whatever reason, the biggest tendency for humans is to believe that's not the truth.
Yeah.
Our scriptures are written because of that problem. So, wisdom specifically is a book that gives you, it kind of does function a little bit like a manual, but one to be used when you're opening up the hood of a car and you're like, wow, there's 17 different ways I could unpack this problem and deal with
Mm-hmm.
it. It's not a you go through all of them and do all of it, because if you did, you would lose your mind. You would totally lose your mind. So blessed is anyone who endures temptation. He's telling you, hey, the happiest, most human version is the person who endures, and it's testing. Temptation is not a good translation, by the way. Um, and that word is a big deal when you're reading this. If you've been a Christian for any amount of time, temptation has wreaked some psychological havoc on you and on your brain and your body and on your history and on your memories. And I'm going to call that out right now because we kind of were taught that temptation means you're bad. The fact that you're
Yeah.
tempted means you're wrong. And it means you're going down the what? The slippery slope.
Heard that one before.
Can't say it with a straight face anymore.
Yeah.
But like, and that's the part of my story too. Like, I can't tell you how many times and years and conversations I had that were, instead of focused on rejoicing in Jesus and who I am in him, I was super concerned that this temptation I had that I didn't even act on is what is getting me into big trouble and why I'm like, crap, I got to do some work now.
Yeah.
And Russ, I know that that story's, I kind of want to hear how you would say that actually.
I would say that I was taught to spend my whole life seeing myself as a problem
Yeah.
that I need to overcome. Jesus is my guide. The cross is a starting point instead of the whole point. Um, the Spirit of God is a jetpack that I need to put on. And he's going to help me overcome this humanity if I get the right formula and operate out of the right framework. And so before long, my whole life is spent um, striving to live in the face of temptation while simultaneously dying um, to the
Yep.
very life that I've been given. Missing out, I guess you could say.
Yep.
It's like the ultimate FOMO that you find yourself in.
It's like the perfect way to just never let yourself be human.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
And I don't mean go and, as we say on the Lark cast, kick dogs and,
Rob Banks.
throw stones and like, I'm not saying that's what it means to be human either. I'm saying, no, what's not human is saturating your brain in fear all day long because of the temptations that you think are so bad. Like, and then cycling back over those. Like that, we need to release ourselves of that lie. That's when we got to go ahead and kick in the ass right out of here in this conversation today, Russ, because the word here for temptation is testing, and most of the time in James he renders it testing,
Yeah,
or translators do, and that's because that's the better word. So testing is very, very different than temptation, and it's not God issuing a test with multiple choice bubbles and you get it right or wrong. Testing is more about the negative experiences, the trials and suffering that you endure or you experience because you're a Christian, because you're trusting in Jesus rather than Caesar, because you're following this Jewish way of life instead of this Gentile way of life.
yeah,
That's totally different. I mean, those aren't even in the same galaxy.
yeah.
So that's
Yeah, it could
probably
be.
number one.
And I feel like, just to throw this in here, we won't get into politics in regard to parties and, policies and the positions that we take because it's just not something that we do. And it's something that I feel like often robs us of what's actually in front of us. But let's just use it as an example for a minute. We live in a time and day in which we are taught to trust some political party and the policies that they put forth to bring about some harmony that we think, is obtainable through human ingenuity and discipline. And what we have seen throughout the course of all of human history is it's a farce. It's always been a farce. It never works. It fails every single time. And so you could just say, testing here could be just as simple as in James's day, you're being taught Caesar is Lord and the way of Caesar is to life. And in contrast to that is no, actually Jesus is Lord, and getting lost in him is where you find life. So everywhere around you, right, is a story that's being handed to you to believe and to tell about yourself that robs, it steals, it blinds, it distorts humanity. So I'm just saying, just something as simple as that, I feel like is what James is getting at here. And what we do in our minds, because we've been so taught that Christianity is, a set of ethics that we need to perfect. We, right, we just kind of relegate this whole thing into like a few categories of like the super sins that we feel like will put you on the outs.
Yep.
And it's like, no, dude, it's so much bigger than that, man. It's so much broader than that. There is actually a satisfaction that comes with with the testing of all the things that are telling you you matter and seeing them for what they are, calling them a lie and saying, no, that's actually not true. There's a joy that's found in seeing Jesus for who he is and being able to say to that, no, no, thank you. I'm going to be far more satisfied in clinging to him than this myth that's being handed to me.
Yep.
But again, it's one of those things where it's like the book's been so mistreated and used for abuse in so many facets that it keeps you from seeing something just as simple as that example that I brought up.
Yep. And it is not read through the lens of the finished work of Jesus.
Correct.
It's read as like I mean, oftentimes they would say it's read through that lens, but when you listen to what people do with it and what they say about it and what they require people to do in light of James, you'd actually think it's a, a case made against the finished work of Jesus,
Yeah.
which is said to be finished
Yeah.
for you, given to you,
Yeah.
and in fact that it's a revelation of where God has always stood in relation to you, not a new standing that you didn't have before.
Yeah.
The problem wasn't he doesn't love you. The problem was you don't think he loves you.
Yeah.
And I actually really think James is saying the same thing because he wants his goal is for us to for the community to become one, to become unified, for life to go better, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, in light of your relationship with God, he wants you to experience that oneness. I don't think James ever tells us that you achieve the oneness,
No.
but there's a couple spots where we get a little hung up on it. And this is one of those. And there's also one, I don't actually haven't listened to your previous episodes, so I don't know what you guys said, but the double minded and unstable, the doubter is double minded and unstable in every way, and they must not expect to receive anything from the Lord, right?
Yeah.
In chapter 1, verses 7 and 8.
Yep.
Um, what that doesn't say is you're not in. What that doesn't say is you're out. I think
Right.
it's saying the same thing as everything else, Paul, and the things we've talked about in Genesis about the tree and the life and the how sin came about and what it is, and the fact that, like, hey, you're when you don't see God for who he is as your father, you treat him like he's someone to be feared. And then you can only perceive him through that lens of fear that you created. And that leads to all kinds of base living, terrible decisions, terrible things done to yourself and to others. God didn't condemn you.
Yeah.
You did it. We do. And here's another thing with this. Like when I read this section we're in right now, I genuinely get the chills. I'm like, Rick, stands up under the test. I can't say I stand up, but I mean, sometimes I have, maybe.
Yep.
Um, but not as a 10 for 10. And last time
Mm-mm.
I checked, the only winners are 10 for 10, you know?
Yep.
Um, so that's just to say, like, man, if you take these things to the logical end of that way of thinking, which is no, James is telling you you better get it together or else, well, then I'm not seeing who makes it through, to be frank. I'm not seeing who pulls this one off. And I just don't think that's James's point anyway. So why would I go there anymore?
Yeah.
Um,
The whole premise of that idea would just completely contradict all that Jesus revealed in the Sermon on the Mount, where he's talking to a crowd that thinks what you're saying, a crowd that thinks that God is distant. He's a God who condemns us. There's a list of things that we need to do to get in his good graces and some things that we need to do to stay there. And, Jesus comes along and unveils what the law actually says. Here's a picture of, harmony. But, and yeah, it simultaneously crushes all of your human ambition to get there. But that's kind of the point. He's not removing a picture of harmony, but he's also never holding up it as a litmus test for getting in. And for a crowd that thinks that that's the case, he did exactly what you're saying. He shows that 10 for 10 is what's needed. Be perfect, right? Right in Matthew, as your heavenly father's perfect. It's a point that's meant to help you look up. It's a point that's meant to bring you to your knees where you go, well, that's not me. And I feel like you have a God on the other end who's going, I know, I know. I just I'm saying this because it seems like you're a species that might say that, but you don't seem to believe that.
Hmm.
And thus you fail to see who I am and who you are. And where the blessedness that James is talking about is actually found. It's a journey of letting go, right? Not getting better.
Right. And I think your story, as you've shared it over the last, what has it been now? 9 months, 10 months or so, ever since you guys got hit as a family in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
Two hurricanes now. Uh, Blake's health
Yeah.
journey and all the little things added in there along the way. One of the things you processed, and I remember you kind of finally put it into words, I think in February, was just like, man, this isn't something for me to figure out or get right or hold against God or give God credit for or any of that. It's just I'm just invited to still trust him
Yeah.
now, even though all these other things happen that I just can't explain, don't feel like I deserved, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, do you see a correlation there with what we're talking about?
100%.
Yeah.
He's a God who promises to be present with us in light of all that we're going through. So I feel like life's a journey of good things to enjoy and hard times to endure, man.
Yes.
I mean, this, right?
That's such a good summary of this. Yeah.
This is the life of faith. And no matter what happens or what comes my way, it's not I'm getting stronger and better. It's no, I'm just learning to cling to Jesus, who is stronger for me and who is always good. And I can honestly say I have found some of that blessedness that James talks about. There's a joy and a satisfaction.
Yeah. Right.
And not trying to figure it all out, man. I feel like so much of life is like a funeral. Probably the best way now to put it. Like you don't go to a funeral with a plan. You don't go to a funeral with a framework. You you just when you're enduring something like that, dude, you just go through it. You let it be what it is. And there's things that you learn and experience in it. Amen. But it was never something to figure out.
Yep.
It was never something to conquer. And yeah, man, it's as crazy as it sounds. I don't think I would have learned any of this apart from all that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which might kind of go back to James chapter 1, early on. Like, count it a joy.
Right.
Count it a joy when you experience the inevitable trials of life. And I think what James is doing here is he's basically saying like life comes with its own drama. It's inevitable. But there's no need to create your own. you know?
Yeah.
So so here's this book of wisdom where it's like this isn't about the foundation of our faith. It's a book about how to dance on that foundation because drama will come. But you don't have to create your own. I
Yeah.
think that's what he's getting at.
Yep. That's well said. And I think that, I couldn't really stop thinking about that part of your story and the journey you guys have been on and you saying that. And that should be enormously encouraging for a lot of people because when have you ever gone through something that
Yeah.
was really hard and oftentimes it actually was impossible, meaning you didn't get it done or you didn't win the thing or you didn't whatever, or you did fail?
Yeah.
When have you ever taken stock of that and been like, yeah, I did the right thing by trying super hard to still get it anyway? uh, or
Right.
man, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to get graded on how well I measured up in that experience or that. That's not how it works. That's not what we're doing. That's not what God is. That's not what the Father does. That's not what a father does. So why would we put that on our Father. So that
Yeah.
takes us right into this next part. And this is, we can't not get here. So, verse 14, one is tested by one's own desire. And he just said, you're not tested by God because he doesn't test you. It's not his thing, it's not his way. I'm not going to get into my parenthesis there. You are tested by your own desire, being lured and enticed by it. So when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And that sin, when it's fully grown, gives birth to death. Don't
Mm.
be deceived, my beloved. My beloved, okay? Man, I love that. This is where you bring wisdom literature and a letter together. This guy is that's such a special term of endearment. And what he just, in my opinion, he just retold the story of the garden right there.
Mm.
And he's recentering the problem, right? And because again, we get hung up on things that are not the actual problem. And so when we build solutions for things that are not the problem, what we're actually building is more problems, and then mass producing it, and then authoring books and signing them and giving them to people, and then punching it out on viral YouTube videos and all this stuff and being
Yeah.
really happy about it or proud of it, right? And I'm like, this curriculum for how to be good that you just created, it's desire. That's the
Yeah.
desire. And
Yeah.
what does desire do? Desire conceives and gives birth to sin. And I know we've talked about this before, but we have to talk about it one more time. The definition for what sin is kind of what it's one of the main axes for what this whole conversation is. If you, however you define that's going to define how you do all this other stuff. And I'm going to give you one of my favorites. Okay. One of my favorite definitions of sin right here by my friend Baxter Kruger, of course. At its heart, sin is unbelief, but not
Yeah.
just the unbelief of ignorance. Sin involves the will in refusing to believe in this Jesus and in what became of us in him. It's a willful resistance to the Holy Spirit's revelation of Jesus in us and in everyone else. Sin is saying no to Christ's eyes, insisting that we are correct and he is wrong. Again, this is the garden. We're unpacking what happened in the
Mm-hmm.
garden. Sin is our demand that Jesus Christ change his ways and join our ways. Sin is our summons to Jesus that he repent and believe in us and learn from us about the real world, that he takes sides with us and with the way we see and perceive and feel and project. We project that he changed the way he sees himself and his Father and the Holy Spirit and us and our enemies.
Mm.
So, in short, to be a sinner is to reject what is in Jesus.
There it is. The spirit of self-reliance, independence, I guess you could say.
Yep.
Yeah. So the
So yeah,
desire.
you have a desire to have this tree of the knowledge of good and evil, this control, you think. You think it's
Mm.
control you're getting. You think it's control of yourself, control of your environment, control of what other people have and can do in relation to you or not. You want to have this experience of life that's actually God like,
Mm-hmm.
right? The role of the creator is to know. You were not actually designed with that capacity. So when you go for it, and when that's what you aim for and what you want, you're not getting executed for it out of
Right.
punishment. No, you're choosing something that inherently kills you. You're choosing something that inherently keeps you from the very good human life you were made for, the very good dependent life, right? The very good, I don't know it all. I don't have to change it all. I don't have to fix it all life. And that's a different way of living. It's a different way of being Christian. It's a different way of being human than anything we're used to. It's a completely new way, honestly, is what it feels like
Yeah.
from anything I experienced. And little story. One of my new gigs is roofing. So I'm a sales rep and primarily I'm like door knocking and going through my network to offer free roof inspections and help people figure out what their roof needs. So went and door knocked, got this job. Guy was all about me taking a look at his roof, found a ton of hail damage like crazy. The you set up the appointment and the insurance sends their adjuster out. So I'm a roof inspector. Insurance company has their inspector to come and tell you their opinion of the roof. And I always show up for those because you really need to have the roofer there to point out the damage because they may not always see it. So I'm talking to this guy, had a meeting this morning, and he was really cool. It was really actually easy conversation. And he asked me how I got into this. And I was like, well, I was in full time ministry for a long time at a church. And then I went on this really fun tour in a camper with Lark. And we were just training people who were experiencing a lot of hurt, pain, and brokenness out of church life. And now I'm roofing because I need to make ends meet and I'll figure out that other stuff later. I can always do it anytime. I just don't get to do it for my living, if you will, right now.
Mm.
And he goes, "Oh yeah, that's really interesting. Me too. I used to be a pastor and got into this and we kind of went back and
Dang.
forth a little bit on his experience. And he's like, yeah, I'm just the expectations and the hypocrisy and what the church has become just didn't make any more sense to me. Um, and I had only mentioned Lark in passing, and when he had gone over to his truck to clean up and take off, he actually walked back. He's like, "Hey, what was that website that you were talking about?" Um, I said, "Yeah, it's called larksite.com," and gave it to him, gave him our Lark card, and um, he was like, "That's really cool. So, what are you guys doing?" I was like, "Well, we talk to people, we listen to their story, and we hang out." And we try to help them unlearn this way of living that is terrified that God doesn't love them and might not love them later on. He's like, wow, that's really cool. And I could see and feel that, like, what is he just was like, you could tell there's a breath of fresh air happening.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he'll follow up with me. I somehow wound up not getting his phone number, which is dumb. I should have for my job as well as just because of that moment, but I missed it. But there's that, like, you can't hide that sense of relief that you get when you meet
Yeah.
someone that gets it, when you meet someone that's been there and that understands your story. You can't hide the relief and you can't hide the freedom that comes in that relationship. And when you stop believing what you think is true and you start trusting what Jesus said
Yeah.
is true, whoo, boy, does that change your experience of day to day life.
Quickly. Changes it quickly, man. I was in Philadelphia uh a week ago hanging out with uh just a number of larks, various gatherings. It was great, man. And but one of the things that hit me and a lot of the questions and the pushbacks that people face, I found myself saying to them, "Hey, what if you responded to people and just asked them, what if you said this to them? What if you said, "Hey man, have you ever thought that maybe what you wanted was the problem? Have you ever thought that maybe what you want is the problem?" And of course, the room gets quiet every time you ask that. And people sort of lean in and are like, well, what do you mean? And I think it points directly to what you are sharing and what James is saying here in these verses. A lot of times, what it is that we want in our pursuit of control, because as Herbert McCabe said, we are the only creatures who don't know how to be creatures,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So in our lust for that tree of knowledge, for the control over all the things that we think make up the good life, we pursue things. We have a desire, as James says, for things that actually brings about, it fuels that spirit of self-reliance. It gives birth to that sin that comes with the independent life by which we don't actually thrive the way we think we do. We actually, we actually, we actually die.
Hmm.
That's what James is saying. There's there's something, man, about just letting go and letting him be God. There's a
Yep.
blessedness in that. And when the trials come, we're able to rest in who he is as a good and present and loving father so that we don't have to see everything as something we got to figure out,
Hmm.
something we got to conquer, right? Something we need a subscription plan for.
Yep.
It's it's actually the opposite of all that. Because most of what we concoct, as you said, might look good on the surface and it might appeal to our human nature of wanting control, but it only brings death.
Yeah.
Kind of spooky.
And the final word should probably go to the final word in our text here because, man, this is a good one. Verse 18, in fulfillment of his own purpose, he gave us birth by the word of truth so that we would become a kind of first fruits of his creatures. That's just riddled with
Mm,
grace and generosity. And he just got done talking about every good gift of is from above, right?
yeah,
And in fulfillment of his own purpose, he gave us birth. It was his plan, his purpose, his joy, his desire, his want, his good pleasure for us to be given birth by the word of truth. And that
yeah.
has to be a reference to Jesus at the
Well, yeah,
very least.
yeah. John 14, he is word, he is truth. So,
Exactly. Yeah. James is not unaware, right?
yeah, yeah. This is who Jesus is. Creator, sustainer, reconciler. He's life. He's
And
not
the
a way, he's
first,
the way.
yeah. And the first fruits isn't a whole bunch of people that figured out how to be super moral.
Mm-mm.
The
No, I
first
think,
fruit of the creatures are the people. He's like trying to say, like, no, I want, like, Jesus is the first. So if he's free in his father, which he is, and the whole New Testament is emphatic about that, then and we're the first fruits of which he is the first. That's what he did this for. That's his goal. That's the good life he has for you. That's what
mhm,
he wants out of this whole thing is for you to experience that same freedom because Jesus didn't come to show you how to become the son or the daughter.
yep,
He came to show you you are the son and the daughter.
yep.
And the sooner you get around to being like, that might be true,
The
the better,
sooner you are,
the more blessed you will be. That's where this
yeah,
all comes full circle.
yeah, the more satisfied you'll be, the less you'll be tempted to go run after things that promise a better humanity that inevitably only dismantle your humanity.
Yep.
It really makes me, just on final word, like it reminds me of a phrase that we've used often in conversations with people, which we might need to just write on something, but You know, I often find myself saying, like, dude, Lark is proposing an entirely different way of being Christian, known as human.
Yep.
I think that's what James is saying.
AKA human.
Human. Like Jesus shows us what it actually means to be human and reveals to us the freedom that's found in who we already are as a people who were made to be human. All of our flaws, all of our frailty, all of our foolishness, he knows it all. And yet, he still made us this way because there's something about this way that allows us to finally find the freedom in him who is the way. And it's there, right? Like in actually embracing what it means to be human in the good times and the bad times, that we find what it means to be satisfied, blessed.
That's just
There it
too
is,
good.
man. It really is. It really is.
It's too good.
Well, dude, thanks for taking the time, man, to hop on
Absolutely.
here.
Yep.
As always, it's great to hear your voice, have your voice. Um, I know you're passing on good news to neighbors and fellow roofers alike. But
Yep.
you know, just being able to have you on here on a pretty consistent basis, I just love the the insights that you bring, and just the reminder, man, of how deep and vast these truths are, but yet how simple and tangible they are to the everyday life, man.
Yep. And how easily we get them completely backwards.
Yeah, yeah. There's that. That would be the truth of the matter. So until next time, my friends, be blessed.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers.